And Grant King, who you saw in that report, is Origin Energy's CEO. I spoke to him earlier. Grant King, welcome to the programme.
Thank you, Tiki.
Well, a very big decision for you today. I gather you do need Foreign Investment Review Board approval. You'd think, though, with Martin Ferguson being with you today, that the deal will be waved through.
Well, I don't. Well, whether it is or isn't, I don't think it's got anything to do with Martin's attendance today, of course. But the 15% interest that Sinopec is taking comes 7.5% from Conoco and 7.5% from ourselves. So effectively, the foreign interest in the project only changes by 7.5%. And I would therefore think that should not, on the surface of it, be a big issue for our government to consider. That would be my view.
The deal is nearly $100 billion over 20 years. Was the high Australian dollar at all a barrier during negotiations?
Not a barrier directly, Tiki, because these deals essentially are done in US dollars, so the sales are in US dollars, and therefore the A-dollar, US dollar exchange rate doesn't matter that much to the sales agreements. Where the exchange rate is relevant, of course, is to companies like Origin, who are A-dollar companies. And at the moment, with high exchange rates and the capital costs ahead of us, that's actually quite favourable to the project.
When would the money start flowing through? Because it's come at a very good time for Queensland. I'm thinking about when they might see some royalties.
Well, Queensland will benefit initially from the construction activity. The Finance Minister of Queensland, Rachel Nolan, who joined with us today, was talking about $900 million a year of investment in regional economies in Queensland from now. So the regional communities in Queensland around Gladstone, Curtis Island, Gladstone community, and in the Darling Downs region will benefit immediately. The project will take 4.5 years to generate revenues, and those revenues will, of course, then attract royalties. So the Queensland government at a treasury level, of course, will begin to receive royalties from that time. But the community will benefit from direct investment immediately.
What about the environmental side? I'm thinking of the media around the Surat Basin in particular. Does your board see a real business risk here?
Well, I think the important thing to acknowledge is that we very much understand the community's interests in this area, particularly environmental impacts, and particularly on water table, groundwater and water use for agricultural production. That sits very high on our risks, if you'd like to think about it that way, our risk register, and we're working very hard to make sure that we understand those risks. Those risks are manageable and we have a minimal impact on the community and on the environment. Now, we're quite confident, because we've done extensive work in this area, that these risks are all manageable, but we are very mindful of the concern and interest the community has. But we do believe the risks are very manageable.
Now, I'm thinking back to that Four Corners programme in February, and I know you guys came out a little bit better than your competitors, but I mean, the issues were particularly of farmers saying they were losing control of their properties, and indeed that the water table, they think, might be sinking. But this issue of connected aquifers is an issue, isn't it?
Well, we think we have a very good scientific understanding of what's happening in the aquifers when we produce coal seam gas, and we believe that the concerns around interconnection between aquifers and depletion of the water table should not be of great concern and is quite manageable. But I think the very important point is that we're not just asking the community to rely on that assurance. Both state and federal government permits require very, very extensive monitoring of groundwater through water bores on properties we're on, adjacent to properties we're on, and in the region. And I think it's that very extensive monitoring that will see us pick up very early whether there are any adverse impacts. And whilst we don't expect there will be, if there are, we will see them very early, and we can then ensure that they're mitigated.
And I guess having the Chinese partner on board endorses that view. They obviously feel confident.
Oh, look, I think that's true, Tiki. They've done a lot of due diligence as an equity transaction as well as a sales transaction. They've conducted extensive reviews with lots of expert assistance.
In broad terms, are you seeing interest from the Japanese post the nuclear crisis over there?
We are, but I think it's very important to say that the Japanese are dealing very much with short-term issues at the moment. They've had to do an enormous amount of work to reconfigure their supply chain, their energy supply chain, and those that are in the LNG business today with spare cargoes are all working very hard to meet that increased demand from Japan and help Japan get through this sort of immediate crisis. Firstly. Secondly, there's a very strong consensus in industry that demand for LNG in Japan will increase medium term. But it would be important to say that that Japanese interest on buying is very much short-term focused on buying cargoes at this point in time.
Now, in the past, Origin Energy has been a supporter of a carbon tax. Are you concerned, are you a supporter still, and are you concerned about the direction that the debate is going in?
Look, we have said absolutely consistently and still advocate that if we are wanting to reduce carbon emissions, and that is the intent of both government and opposition, then a carbon price, not a carbon tax, a carbon price is the most effective way to do it. The government appears very committed to implementing a scheme, and we are therefore in that quite challenging phase of negotiations where all of the participants, all the companies and businesses and industries involved are increasingly understanding what that means for them and quite understandably concerned about their own interests and looking after their own interests. And I think companies, as is Origin, are bound to do so. So it is a difficult period, and that's, I think, why we're hearing a lot of commentary in the media. But to the extent that the government remains committed to putting a price on carbon, they and business and other sectors of the communities will have to work through this phase and find some form of compromise that allows us to go ahead.
And finally, now that you've locked in this enormous deal, are we to expect another big capital raising from Origin Energy this year?
Not in the short term. We've, as you're aware by your question, just completed a $2.3 billion capital raising, and I must take this opportunity to thank our shareholders very much for their support, both at an institutional and a retail level, in doing that. I think the next time to have that discussion is when we take that final investment decision, and at that time we'll release the capital costs of the project and the schedule for the project, and then we'll be a better place to talk about how we will fund that project and whether there are any capital raising requirements as a part of that.
Grant King, I thank you very much for joining us on Lateline Business.